Hello to everyone joining us online. My name is Alyssa. I am part of the communications team at the National Capital Authority. It has been a wonderful 4 weeks being able to connect with everyone as we've gone out and spoken about North Curtin. And so thank you much to everyone that has joined us online and in person for this lovely event. I'd like to start off by acknowledging our Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the land. Dara Nuna Dara Nunawo, Yangu Nalamanyan Dunimanyan, Nunawa Wari, Dara Wari, Dindi, Wangirlin Jinyin. This is Ngunnawal country. Today we gather on Ngunnawal country and pay our respects to our elders. Thank you for that. A couple of housekeeping things. So bathrooms, for those that haven't visited them yet, they're out the end of the corridor to the right, past the elevators, kind of all the way down the other side of the building, but that's okay. It's nice to get a stretch of our legs. If the fire alarm goes off for whatever reason, there are lovely people, staff that will come and gather us and escort us out. If anyone would like to put their phone on silent, that hasn't already, that'll be greatly appreciated. A couple of things about the session today. So we're going to start off with a introduction and a presentation from the National Capital Authority, and we do welcome our colleagues from CED and SLA as well. And then when we get to the question part, I'll be alternating between asking questions in room and questions online. So if you do have a question in the room, the lovely Shan, who greeted you all at the front, will be running microphones around. Please do wait until you have a microphone so our audience online can hear the question and doesn't miss out. I would now love to hand over to Karen, the Chief Executive of the National Capital Authority, to say a few quick words.
Thanks, Alyssa. And I will be relatively brief because I have many colleagues here tonight to help with this presentation. And that's really what I just wanted to say in this introduction. So Erin Brady will be doing the main presentation on the DCPDDs for the North Curtin residential estate. Erin is our acting chief planner. And I am very pleased and very appreciative that we are being joined tonight by representatives from ACT government. So Sam Engel is here from CED, City and Environment Directorate. Simon Tennant sitting alongside him, and Ian Wood Bradley, who's here from the SLA, so the Suburban Land Agency. I think this is a good demonstration of the fact that the North Curtin residential estate sits in the broader context of longer term and broader planning work that is being done by ACT government. The light rail stage 2B, as you're all familiar with, and the Southern Gateway planning that it sort of sets the context for that. And so it's good to have that context here tonight from the ACT government representatives. I do want to say, though, that the focus tonight is on the residential estate. It is on a National Capital Authority process, which requires the development of detailed conditions of planning, design and development for that estate. And so that's the product that we'll be discussing and focusing on. But as I said, context is always important for these things. The Suburban Land Agency is the area of ACT government that effectively is managing this estate and will lead the land release process and the development of the estate going forward, and of course have been very involved in getting the planning work to this stage for us to bring it forward as a planning document, an instrument under the National Capital Plan. So with that, I will ask Erin to give us the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Karen, and good evening, everybody. As Karen said, this is a National Capital Authority item where the planning authority for the site, and that came about through Amendment 95 that was finalised in 2020-2021. You can go to the next slide if. Oh, I've got to do that. Okay. There we go. I can do it myself. Okay. So Amendment 95 was part of discussions between the ACT government and the National Capital Authority, and this site, which is sort of roughly within the green circle, was identified as an area that could be appropriate for a diplomatic estate, which the NCA is responsible for, and had been looking for quite a while for suitable land for diplomatic estate because the demand increases over time. So the site was identified as suitable for that, and it was agreed that part of the site would be for residential development for the ACT government because it was land that the ACT government was the responsible body for. So it became designated land under the National Capital Plan Amendment, and that's why we as the National Capital Authority are the planning authority for the site. But it does mean that the residential area, the ACT government also has some responsibility for that. And as Karen said, the Suburban Land Agency is the agency responsible for delivering the development there. So as Karen's indicated, we're working very closely together for the planning and delivery of this. So just to give you, I'm going to run through what the DCPDD is, what's in it. So hopefully most of you have looked at that, but I'm just going to run through what it does, what it is, how we sort of came to have what's in there, and then how we will use it. So just as a bit of background, as I mentioned, drivers behind this have been the need for diplomatic land, identifying land that's in good locations or well located, as referred to under some of the federal government policies around the housing agenda and reforms. This was seen as a good location. It's on a main corridor between centres. It's on an area adjacent to an area identified for potential development because of light rail or major transit route. And Sam from ACT City and Environment Directorate will talk a little bit more about the planning that's been happening around that corridor. It's been identified in the ACT Planning Strategy 2018 and then in district strategies subsequent to that as an area appropriate for investigation for development. So that work has progressed and is sort of getting us to where we are now with the DCPDD. So I think I've covered off on some of that, but just a bit of an explanation. The DCPDD, I'll just keep referring to it as that because it's too much of a mouthful to keep saying all the words. As Karen said, it's specific to the area that's marked as red. It doesn't include, this document doesn't apply to the diplomatic estate. That's actually covered under another part of the National Capital Plan. It applies to development for those areas. So this applies to the open space area and to the residential area. So it is site specific and it has taken into account various conditions around the land, where it sits in terms of its context, and that's what some of our colleagues are here to also talk to, how those broader considerations have been taken into account. So what is the DCPDD? Karen indicated it was a requirement under the National Capital Plan that as part of Amendment 95, that there would be a next step, which is detailed conditions of planning, design and development, which provide more specific provisions that apply to the site. There was a version consulted on by the ACT government and a consultation report done in 2024. So we've taken that into account in preparing this document. This document has then considered a broader range of things to come about with detailed provisions for the area around, as you will have noticed, the ecology park, and then it goes right through to detailed provisions about height and apartment design. So it's its own sort of planning document, and as Karen said, because it's required under the National Capital Plan, it does have status. The National Capital Authority will be responsible for works approvals that come in, and they will have to both consider this and be assessed against this. So for developers, they need to look at this and consider this in preparing any proposals. So the Suburban Land Agency will be considering these in any proposals. We as the National Capital Authority will be assessing using these. For community, it gives a benefit that you get to see what is proposed generally for this site and what the development might end up looking like. The DCPDD goes through quite clearly a number, there's about a dozen or so objectives, and some of them relate to providing an unencumbered site for the diplomatic estate. That relates a bit to some of the infrastructure works that have got to happen on the overall site. But it does talk about active travel connections. It talks about diversity of housing. It talks about providing services within the development. The objectives really are the guiding elements for the DCPDD, and will be important for us to consider when we start getting proposals in. Then following from the objectives, we've broken the document into two parts really. There's the urban structure part, and then there's the more detailed provisions. The urban structure gives a pretty good indication, at least in a two-dimensional perspective, of what are the key physical elements of this development. So it has identified where the main connection points are from a vehicular access, so Cotter Road and onto McCulloch Street. It identifies where active travel is. It identifies where there will potentially be buses and potentially the light rail. It gives an indication of where open space is. It gives you an idea of the block layout. So it gives you a pretty good idea of structurally what this development will end up looking like. Then we go through in a bit more detail around some key structural elements. So we go through public domain, and probably one of the biggest and really positive aspects of this development is the ecology park. So I'll talk a little bit more about it, but certainly the Suburban Land Agency will also talk a little bit about that as part of their delivery program. It gives back quite a bit of open space. It will address some of the issues that there are around Yarralumla Creek. We've heard from lots of people. As Alyssa said, we've been doing consultation over the last month. We've heard lots of things from people about renaturalising Yarralumla Creek, dealing with flooding issues and lots of those things. So that's gone into the consideration about the ecology park. It will provide open space and access connecting existing Curtin with this development. It will connect through to pedestrian paths, cycle paths. So it provides a pretty fantastic bit of open space for the area. So I'll just step through each of these areas. So I've talked a bit about the ecology park. There are also a couple of local parks within the development that you can see, sort of the green squares. When you look at some of the built form elements a bit later, you can see that there's some commercial proposed at ground level, often around the areas where the open space is. And so for these, the two sort of green areas that you can see in there in the within the development, they will be like nodes within the development where there's open space and potentially cafes, childcare centres, those sorts of local services around that area. So they'll actually be quite an active and attractive area. They've also been a consideration in terms of heights, which I'll come to, and the way heights and built form have sort of been distributed through the development. The Water Ecology Park, as I mentioned, it's a pretty fantastic opportunity to both renaturalise Yarralumla Creek and deal with some broader issues with Yarralumla Creek. It has factored in some of the broader elements and considered things like, Healthy Waterways program that we years ago that had proposals for some of these areas as well. It will be a great resource for people and a pretty lovely area, really, if it's going to look like that and provide connections across to the existing areas. Land use, it's a residential community. As I mentioned, it's going to have some commercial that will service the areas locally, and we've had lots of people ask us that at consultation events that we've done so far. Will there be some local services? Will people be relying on the Curtin shops? There will be some local services there, as I said, like childcare centres, cafes, those sorts of local things. And there's a provision for commercial at ground level for some of the buildings to provide for those sorts of services. Broader community services, I know that's also been a question, and as I said, we'll be working a lot with the ACT government on some of the delivery aspects of this, and Sam might talk a little bit more to that. Built form and heights, it's generally, it's a maximum of 8 stories. The 8 stories are generally around areas of open space. It goes down to 3 stories as you go west toward the diplomatic estate, and that's been a requirement that as you get closer to the diplomatic estate there needs to be lower dwellings. That's the area where there are townhouses proposed as you go over toward that sort of green separation between this residential area and the future diplomatic estate. So it's apartment buildings. The provisions in the DCPDD do require apartments of certain sizes, a variety of different apartments, and people have mentioned things to us about, if this is an area that downsizers might move to, we need to be aware of, those different sizes and types of dwellings. Okay, then movement, the street network. So the document has different streetscapes, which sort of show, where there are some that are a bit more pedestrian priority, where there's on-street parking closer to some of the active areas within the development. There's parking within buildings as well, but it does show where there are active travel networks, where there will be connections to existing cycle paths, new cycle paths provided. Some people have asked us about buses. There has been, we've looked at what are the buses that are around this area now. Obviously, buses don't service this area now because it's undeveloped, but it's a consideration for the future of what buses might be useful in this area. Are there bus networks that could have stops near this area? And of course, there's the light rail, which the closest stops at the moment are at Kent Street and Carruthers Street. People have asked us about, seen some documents that there's a potential stop sort of across from the north of this site. The ACT government has indicated that that's neither a yes or a no at the moment. It's still in there for future proofing, a little bit perhaps like the Mitchell stop in the light rail stage 1. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what we've covered in the DCPDD, and it gives a pretty good level of detail about what we want this development to look like and what's important in delivering this development. As I said, there are some streetscapes for all the different streets in the DCPDD. If you've looked through the document, you can see it's actually quite detailed. In terms of implementation, Karen mentioned this, the National Capital Authority is the planning authority, and we're going to be responsible for the works approvals as they come in. So the same as development applications, but works approvals in the NCA world. So we're involved in that regard. The City and Environment Directorate, and I'll let Sam speak shortly, is responsible for broader planning. So it's important that we integrate in that respect. and the SLA is responsible for the delivery of the development and responsible for land release. And I'll let Simon speak to that shortly as well. So I'll jump to, I think Simon is going to speak first, or Sam. Sam's going to speak first, and then we'll come back and wrap up before we have some questions. Okay. I need to jump. Oh. Oh. Oh, sorry. Whoops. You next. Sorry.
Just while they're getting that set up, so my name's Sam Engel. I work for the ACT government. The City Environment Directorate is the directorate, and in my part of the organisation, I've got the environment, planning, and the policy. I'll hold on to this. Areas. We work closely with the Suburban Land Agency, which is also another ACT government agency. They're our delivery partner in terms of new estate development. So the key things here, so yeah, I've just got the one slide. I just wanted to give you a bit of the broader context. So the government announced a couple of years ago that the planning agency would work on a Southern Gateway design framework, which is it's a really strategic level document that looks at the entire corridor of the stage 2B, and then also extends down to the southern end of Woden. And looks at that corridor, looks at the opportunities for transformation, as a result of the investment in. As part of that, the North Curtin area is a key development site in that. As we've been working very closely with the SLA, and what you'll see in the framework when it's coming out, and it's just currently being considered by government, so we expect it'll be released on community consultation in mid-June, is that you'll see the incorporation of this estate in there and how it fits into some of the broader context. Some of that's already been provided as part of the work that has been undertaken by the NCA, and also Simon will provide a bit more context on. But some of the things that we've heard as part of the consultation, which will be, I just want to give you assurance, are being covered off in that framework, are looking at things like traffic movement. And so as part of that strategic piece of work, we're doing a corridor study, which is looking at what will be the 2B corridor, but also some of the other elements in terms of what are the connections in, so east-west connections across, what is, I'll lean into can you hear me up the back? Yep, okay, sorry. So what are the east-west connections? What are some of the movements, the active travel movements, and how will the broader corridor operate from a transport perspective? And this is sort of looking both now, but out to 2050 about how will it operate. What are the traffic projections with the various new developments along the corridor? So that will be coming. It's a piece of work that's underway at the moment. The other one that you'll see as part of the framework when it comes out is the community needs assessment. So there's been community needs assessments across the ACT and also specifically in the corridor. So that is covered off, where we've looked at all the different areas of community facilities. What do they look like against various benchmarks, and then have got them either identified as current community facilities, areas for future community facilities, and they'll be included as sort of opportunities for community facilities. So I'm happy to take any sort of questions when we get to it, but I really I'm here to sort of give you a sense of what's coming as part of the broader planning framework. I think I'll now hand over to Simon.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks very much to the NCA for the invitation to come and talk about the project. We have been working very collaboratively with the team at the NCA on this particular project, one of many that the SLA is responsible for going forward. And one of the key, I guess, things that I will mention is that we are the delivery arm of government. There's a bit of subtlety in the language there. We're not always the developer. We are the delivery arm. There's a few things available to us in terms of how we put our projects out to market across the ACT. But our master, I guess you could say, is what's referred to as the Housing Supply and Land Release Program, the HSLRP. And so this project does appear on a program, and these are our writing instructions. We will be working closely with the NCA through this process, and then we will launch into our process of essentially making some decisions about what delivery might look like. But we actually have some timings associated with that. So you can see the first releases are earmarked there for 27, 28, and then if several releases in concurrent years, or sorry, following years, and a few releases in out years as well. Based on the conditions in the NCA planning documentation, a potential of around about 12,000 dwellings and around about 2,000 square, 1,200 decimal place. And around about 2,000 square metres of non-residential floor area, which Erin was talking about just before. The options available to the SLA, these have not yet been resolved, so we have a pretty stringent process within when it comes to conceptually coming up with a position on how we go about delivering estates. One of the usual models is for SLA to take on the full development of the site. And again, I'll just clarify that by saying we will produce all of the enabling infrastructure as long as along with the public realm. We won't be the ones building the buildings. We will be ensuring that the enabling works and the civil infrastructure is in place in accordance with the conditions. And then we go through a process then of releasing those blocks of land to developers through competitive processes. There is a model whereby we could consider a joint venture. That's not something that's new to the ACT government. There's a few projects that we've worked with developers on. There are advantages to that. Obviously, we have some control and influence over bringing land to the table, and the developers can bring other expertise when it comes to built form. So there is an option around that. These decisions haven't yet been made. And there's an option also potentially available to us, which is just essentially called an in globo release. So the site will go out as an undeveloped parcel, but very much within the bounds of what the planning conditions will require, and the successful developer will then be required to respond to that. Those decisions haven't been made, but we are well down the path of understanding the development project and all of the metrics within. There is an approval process that SLA still need to go through, but we're very close to I guess, finalising what that might look like. In terms then of some of those enabling works, we also are very excited about the Water Ecology Park. This is business as usual for SLA. Our estates typically devote quite a bit of attention to the management of water through our estates, not just from a safety perspective, but also from an ecological perspective as well. And as Erin has neatly outlined, the ambition here for North Curtin is pretty significant, and we absolutely understand the challenges of the Yarralumla Creek as well. So we know that this estate will have a water-sensitive urban design component to it, whereby as the rain falls and the landscape changes through to the development, we need to understand that hydrology. So there will be quite a bit of thinking around the water-sensitive urban design and the ecology park adjacent to not just the development, but also to the creek. And then as it interfaces with the creek, that will also, I guess, fit in with what is a much larger piece of work that SLA are doing on Yarralumla Creek. And I'm certainly happy to take some questions on that a little later as well. In terms of what are the next steps from here, obviously this process will run its course. We'll continue to work very collaboratively with the NCA. At some point, this process will finish, and then the baton will be handed to SLA. SLA will essentially start another process, which is starting to develop concept design just around how taking the conditions and then starting to put some real focused detail on what the concept might look like. There will be a number of touch points where the community can come back and influence what SLA does when it comes to more detailed design. And then essentially the real detail and the devil in the detail will come via a works approval. So unlike ACT government processes through territory plan variations and that type of approach, this one is very much, as Erin has said, in the Commonwealth sphere. So we'll be bringing forward potentially some works approvals, which will be very clear as to how the estate will be constructed, the staging around it, and then also some of that detail around public realm connectivity, and also landscape design and water sensitive urban design. So Great to be part of this process. I'm delighted that thus far the consultation's going relatively well. Looking forward to getting your questions tonight, but looking forward to that. So thank you. To you, Erin, thank you.
So just before we jump to questions, just to clarify from the NCA, I'm not as tall as them, NCA perspective. So following this consultation, we'll do a consultation report that will be made public. I think most of you hopefully are aware we've had a pretty big consultation period over the last month where we've had 4 pop-ups at different locations, and this evening, which is also live streamed and people can have a look at if they can't make it this evening online or here. But we do finish the consultation shortly. Consultation report, we will take that into account as we finalise the DCPDD. Then they go through a process of approval. And as Karen said, they've been a requirement under the National Capital Plan, so they'll go through a formal approval process, and then they will become the planning document that we apply for development in this case. So that's from our perspective, what will happen more directly after this. And then, as Simon said, we get to a point where we interact with each other around works approvals, and that's a process where we get works approvals, and most of those would be made public for public consultation unless they were minor works, and then we wouldn't. But as Simon said, some of those first ones will be probably big applications around enabling works, infrastructure, the open space, those sorts of things. So we'd envisage that they would be publicly consulted on, so the community will get to be involved as this development progresses as well. I do want to just say thank you to all the people who've been to the consultation events. We've had pretty good attendance at people coming to pop-ups, and I know coming out even this evening. So thank you for participating in that. I'm going to hand over now to Alyssa, she's going to try and manage us all with the questions and answers. So I think even though, sorry, it's a bit of a barrier that we're at a table here, it's not meant to be like that, but we're just going to sit up here. So if you want to ask us questions, our various colleagues can answer those questions.
Sorry, everyone, just give me a moment. As I said before, if you are online and would like to send me through a question, please add it to the Q&A of the document. The live stream, and I'll be able to see it come through and we will send it through. We haven't had any come from online yet. So the lovely Shan, if there is anyone in the room that would like to start us off, raise your hand and she can come on over. Yep. Amazing.
Oh, thank you. My name's Joseph, and I was just wondering, is there ever any consideration from access from the Cotter Road south on Yarra Glen? I think that should have really been sorted out with the Molonglo development, but it was obviously forgotten or just tucked under the table.
Perfect. So we're talking about access from Cotter Road south onto Yarra Glen. Thank you.
Yeah, so when I mentioned the transport corridor study, so that is that one of the big questions for that is what are the how does the traffic currently flow? So yeah, well understood that we've got a lot of traffic that's moving through the centre of Curtin, and we will be looking at that we are looking at that as part of that transport corridor study. So yep, so that you won't see that come out in June, but it is a piece of work that we're doing this year.
Perfect. And now I have an online question that is of a similar topic. But Karen, I might hand it over to you. It talks about how the North Curtin DCPDD can't be meaningfully assessed without seeing how it fits in with the Southern Gateway framework. And there is a question about whether or not the timing of the consultation from this and the timing of the consultation for Southern Gateway and how they can happen separately.
Thank you. As Sam said, the formal processes from ACT government on the Southern Gateway strategy are a little bit away. Our engagement process still has a month to go as well. But I think the considerations, I mean, all of these works have been in process in various stages of the process for multiple years now. And I think the considerations of how one fits into the other has certainly been happening within the various agencies that we've brought together for you here today to sort of demonstrate that you know, those discussions and those considerations are happening. I suppose with these sorts of developments which do occur over a long period of time and have quite complex planning and you know, approval processes and legislative changes, et cetera, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to align everything so that it all happens at the one time. So we are, you know, stepping through stages. The broader work has happened to some extent and is continuing to happen. And as this estate progresses, because it's still 2 years away from development, and as we've heard tonight, there are further stages of consultation as that development might happen. I think all of these issues will iteratively and progressively be open for further consideration by the people here and further consultation with the people in the audience tonight.
Lovely. And I believe the mic has reached another person.
Yes,
Hello.
So I'm John Bell. I want to pursue this particular issue in a bit more detail, and I want to ask about the Mint interchange. Now, the Mint interchange gets mentioned in some of the Southern Gateway documents, and I understand there's going to be yet another study of how to do the Mint interchange. In the meantime, I see figure 8 in this document makes it look like it's a simple intersection of the Cotter Road across Yarra Glen or Adelaide Avenue as it may be, and then across to Denison Street, which doesn't make any sense at all. But my real question is, can you not, don't you have to sort out the Mint interchange before you start doing road work on this?
So, I mean, I think this is one of these things about the long lead times that you see with these types of projects. So we are doing that work. You're right, it's a very complicated intersection. Absolutely. There's also the provision, as Erin mentioned, for a possible light rail stop. So there's a lot of different transport and movement happening in that sort of very tight area. So that's why we need to have done the work for that. The timeframes for this development, I mean, probably to clarify, there was some timeframes there about release dates, but that's not necessarily built form release dates. That is actually just sort of going to market for release. So the timeframes, have you got a sort of development delivery timeframes for?
Yeah, the pardon me, the development delivery timeframe to enable land release. Essentially, once we get works approval, we can then start land release because of the size of the project. It'll be, as you saw in the table, that'll be staged over a few years. So yes, the actual construction of the estate essentially would probably be happening in around about 27, 28, potentially 28, 29, but that will be based on an approved works approval, which allows us to release land. And sorry, before I hand the microphone, this is my colleague Ian Wood-Bradley from the SLA as well, who's worked very closely with the NCA.
Yeah, just to address the comment about how can you do the estate without really understanding what the Mint interchange could or should be. We've purposely decoupled this estate from that interchange, but we've designed it to enable future changes to that interchange over time. So we have factored that in, but this estate can occur independent of that happening.
And I might just clarify on that point. The NCA responsibility is for the estate only. And so, you know, this document is looking at that estate. And while it's been and has necessarily been considered in the broader context, I think it is as Erin has described, it's the urban structure, it's the open space, it's the internal road planning and built form within the state that is the focus of the document that is required under the National Capital Plan.
Thank you, everyone. I've got another online question that we're going to. And so this is probably one that I'll start with the NCA and then SLA may like to add. This person says, in my view, developers have no interest in, or in fact, have not built interesting or in fact buildings that don't have problems. How can we be sure that this development will be of a higher standard? So I think that refers to how we're going to use the DCPDD.
I think there's probably comments that could be made on the flip side of that as well. And certainly we look at some examples around Campbell 5 and other parts of Canberra that the National Capital Authorities had a role in, and some of our colleagues as well. We think that the provisions we've included in the DCPDD do set a good standard, and design quality is important. I mean, the building code deals with certain other aspects, but from a design perspective, we think that the standards that we've put in here are of a level that require a high quality of design, and we certainly would expect that, and that will be one of the considerations when we get works approvals in.
Fantastic. I believe there's another question in the room. Hello.
Hi, it's Nelson Tang. I'm the president of the Woden Valley Community Council, and I actually am a resident on McCulloch Street. So I'm going to ask this question about the road traffic study, because particularly it's going to impact me a lot. We've looked at 1,200 dwellings coming from the new precinct that is accessing McCulloch Street and also onto Cotter Road. I just want to understand what options there are to manage this increased traffic, and also more essentially in terms of that study, whether there's a qualitative part, one that goes out to public consultation to get residents' feedback, for example.
So there will be the consultation process on the Southern Gateway, as I said. So that's the first stage of that consultation. So we'll be going out and we'll be probably coming here or doing pop-ups in the Curtin area. But I can sort of take that concern. I think it is well understood, the traffic flows on McCulloch, and as I said, the study is looking at what are some of the options to relieve it, possibly not necessarily from the North Curtin development, but from those broader traffic movements. So yeah, that is, and that really comes down to what are some of the possible augmentation and investment options the government can make. So that will throw up those different sort of technical options, I guess I would say, from a transport study. And then the consultation process, definitely we can incorporate that those views into that, and feed that into the broader planning considerations.
Thank you. Another one online. This one's for the NCA, and it is adjacent to the North Curtin residential area. And it's just a question about the diplomatic estate, and if we have any updates on how many diplomatic properties we're looking in the area at the moment.
Thank you for the question. Obviously, as again, Erin described, a genesis of this whole process was to identify land for new diplomatic estate within the capital. Sorry, I'm just watching what's going on. And so that land has been reserved for that purpose. At the moment, the government's monitoring the actual demand for new diplomatic estates. We still have some land capacity in the other suburbs where diplomatic residences exist at the moment. So O'Malley, particularly Deakin, Yarralumla to a lesser extent. So the long-term timeframes aren't established yet, but it's an exercise in monitoring the demand, the call for these lands. We have the supply reserved through these works on the residential estate. It will usefully enable some of the early infrastructure works, which we appreciate. It will support the diplomatic estate going forward. But at this stage, there's no concrete plans for developing the diplomatic component of the estate.
Thank you, Karen. And I believe we've got another question in this side, and then we're going to go to the other side. Hello.
Chris Johnson from Curtin Residents and also Worden Valley. Getting back inside the estate, the provision for commercial and service activities seems to be just, there will be some, there may be some, it may be somewhere, it will be, but without any integrated planning of what's really a new suburb coming along. This is half the size of Curtin, or more than half the size of Curtin, and that's a biggish suburb. It needs to have an integrated plan, a holistic plan. Can I ask if there's going to be more detailed planning or more detailed provisions of what kinds of services and what kinds of community facilities, whether it's in terms of there's some waving hands of childcare and cafes and whatever, supermarkets, something like that? Are there more provisions which are going to go in the conditions?
At this point, there's not a plan for a detailed retail study or anything like that. At the moment, what we've done with the DCPDD is make what we think is adequate provision for the availability of certain areas in suitable locations to deliver those services, which the market will largely respond to. So from a planning perspective, we think the DCPDD identifies the best locations and a certain amount of commercial land. And as Simon indicated, that there's at least 2,000 square metres of GFA that would be for non-residential uses. So at the moment, we think that we've made adequate provision of the best locations where we indicate that those uses should be. But I think as the more detailed planning and design of the estate happens, some of those things will become clearer.
Lovely. I have another one online. Coming back to our water ecology park and just confirming which agency is responsible for the delivery of the water ecology park.
The delivery of the water ecology park, there are some options available to the Suburban Land Agency. As I've mentioned in one of those slides, we can take on the full development of the estate. We can also require a developer to deliver that on our behalf, which would be quite detailed in terms of the specification and what would be in there. As I mentioned, those decisions are yet to be made, but we absolutely acknowledge that it's a key part of the whole project and it's of great importance to SLA. So whether, again, we deliver it or whether we work closely with the developer, that decision is yet to be made.
Thank you. And we're going to the front here. Hello.
Too easy. Hiya, thank you. Malcolm Burke, Woden Progress Association. Various pro-housing organisations, ourselves included, have been wondering as to what the process was surrounding the decision around the building heights of the estate. What was the process to decide these building heights, and what room is there to increase them in order to deliver desperately needed housing, given the Curtin Place development was capped back in around 2017, and particularly given school enrolments at places like Curtin and Yarralumla at primaries are at historic lows?
That's definitely a balancing act of, you can imagine we hear it's too high. It's we rarely hear it's too low. So it has been a balancing act, which factors in things like what's the infrastructure capacity to support that, what's the current landscape like, what's the current grade change like, how visible will it be? It is on an important corridor. So a lot of those considerations lead into what we think are appropriate heights, but then also there's the, in all reality, there's the feasibility aspect that that if we're going to be doing developments, we need to make them appropriate for people and for a mix of people, but they also need to be feasible to develop. So it's a real mix of a lot of those things that have gone into the heights. The height distribution, I did mention, it goes down to 3-story as you get closer to the diplomatic estate. That is partly a requirement related to diplomatic estates, that there's not a lot of overlooking. So that's why some of the heights are lower in that area, and also to provide a bit of diversity of housing. That's where there are some townhouses over there. Some of the heights, I think I mentioned, are around the open space, and that's to sort of capture views and opportunities to be near open space. So it's been a real range of those sorts of things that have influenced the different heights.
Thank you. At the moment, we don't have any more questions online, so I'll go back to the room. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Hello, my name is Christine Lawrence. I'm on the committee of the ACT Equestrian Association, and the Government Paddock Users Group is one of our affiliates. I was quite shocked to see this report. I wasn't quite expecting the content. I'm very pleased to hear that it will be some time before the diplomatic estate is developed, because there's a government horse paddock on that site. There's a government contract which is managed through rural services, and there are horses on there at the moment. The reason I'm concerned is the water park, which I hadn't heard of before, despite some years of consultation with NCA about the land swap, etc., seems to remove an additional paddock from the suite of paddocks. We were expecting to lose paddock 4. We knew that was going to turn into residential development, but we weren't expecting to use an entire extra paddock, which will reduce the paddock system to 3. The connection through the water park on the southern side of the Yarralumla Creek, between the creek and Curtin, is part of the government designated equestrian routes, which go all the way around Curtin. They don't appear anywhere in the water park, nor does the connection to the horse paddocks. So my concern really is, how did this water park get designed? Did anybody factor in the horse paddocks on the other side? Because on paper, the way it looks at the moment, the only way for those people to get their horses out of Curtin horse paddocks is to ride them down McCulloch Street in the traffic. So, I'd like to get a bit more information about what the intention is with that map and how it's going to be improved, so it actually reflects what actually happens in the community. Because the word horse appears once in that document, right at the front.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Nice to see you again. So yeah, the horses currently on site have been a pretty significant consideration for the Suburban Land Agency. The design of the water ecology park at the moment is small d design. It is very conceptual. As I mentioned before, there's going to be many iterative processes with the community and with the likes of yourself with regards to the future of agistment there. It will come as no surprise that as this project clearly shows, as Canberra matures, that we know that the lease expires, I think, on the agistment in the North Curtin horse paddocks in 2027. We are already actively working with agistment ACT within the ACT government, and we are also funding works to increase capability for agistment elsewhere in the ACT. So while there will be some displacement, which we always knew about, and I guess the community would know about as well, we have a process in place to essentially transition the horses out of the paddocks. With regards to the connectivity and the horse trails, that can be absolutely informed by a further process which SLA will undertake when it comes to the more detailed design of the water ecology park. Sorry, Christine? Yeah, so we're very keen to talk to you about that, Christine. So there will be a pretty significant opportunity to understand those needs at this stage.
And I'll go to you. Hello.
Ian Elsom, Curtin Residents Association. I'll start with a comment on some of the preceding discussion before I have a question as well. So we understand that the NCA is responsible for setting the planning and development conditions for the diplomatic precinct, including the residential area. However, from the community's perspective, the interaction of what's proposed with our communities and its impact upon them, not just Curtin, but surrounding suburbs like Yarralumla and Deakin, and even more broadly for all users of Cotter Road, for example. It's impossible to decouple that interaction and impact from what's proposed for on-site. So the information about the planning and design framework for the Southern Gateway, which we were told had information in mid-February that would come out in mid-year. The traffic impact study, which had an end date of 6th of May, a week ago. You know, those things are essential for the community to be able to actually make an informed response. And given, in fact, from the perspective of the time it's been taking to develop all these things, the difference between March and June is inconsequential. And I would say we believe that all the necessary information should have been released at the same time. So that's my statement. My question. So the residential area has quite high biodiversity, which includes nationally endangered species, including golden sun moth and superb parrot. And indeed, the ACT government's Woden district strategy, there's a statement there which says about the North Curtin residential area, development should acknowledge biodiversity values in this area, including golden sun moth habitat to the north. And I also note the National Capital Plan. One of its principles includes protection of endangered species and ecological communities. So, but I see nothing in what's being put forward which actually covers this. There is a statement in the explanatory document which says that the Commonwealth CPPC Act will be looked at later. From my point of view, this is putting the cart before the horse. And for example, the current plan has buildings right on top of that golden moth habitat. Among other things, we have now a report from a professional ecologist which there's a lot more potential for nationally endangered species than I realise on this site, and it's also a migratory pathway for very rare species. None of this seems to have been taken into account. Why not? And why leave yourself open to very substantial rework to conform with the EBC Act?
Thank you for that, Jiz. Thank you. Erin, sorry, Karen, you're going to start? Okay.
I'll start, but I think others are going to comment in more detail. But Ian, thank you for your question. Firstly, I acknowledge your comments around process and timing, but I think I would just restate my comments that, you know, we do need to move on the pieces we can move on. Otherwise, we'd be waiting for, you know, everything to come together. On your comment on the biodiversity issues, again, you've possibly answered it yourself, but I was just going to say that there are further stages which we've talked about tonight. The works approval stage under the National Capital Plan has as a requirement the addressing of these issues and meeting EPBC Act requirements as necessary. This is a high-level plan for a proposed urban structure for an area. And so it's not until you get to the detail of where the built form will be undertaken, etc., that we can really address those issues at the level of detail that you're suggesting. But I will let SLA talk because I'm sure they've done some consideration of this already.
Confirming we have, Karen. We are pretty well advanced in terms of our ecological studies. I'll hand to Ian in a second, but we are absolutely cognizant of some of those endangered species that do exist across the site. As a result, I think we've had 2 consultants working pretty hard on it. We are also familiar with what the pathway will be for EPBC referral. So yes, we're well on top of it, and it will continue to, our understanding will continue to develop in the coming months. Ian can give us more detail.
So we've undertaken quite recent ecological surveys of North Curtin and particularly the extent of golden sun moth, and we've got a fairly good handle on the extent of habitat. We are in the process of preparing a referral, and well, in fact, it may in fact have, it's likely to, it's imminent if not happened already. But we're fairly confident that we can conserve the areas that we've identified, particularly within the Water Ecology Park, and we think that outside of that area, there's probably not as widespread as what was originally thought.
Thank you. I've just had a couple of online questions come through, so I'll just quickly ask them before I come across to you, Fiona. So the first one, to the lovely person online that asked about light rail, that was covered in the presentation we gave. However, the recording will be online. So if there was something you missed about the Kent and Carruthers Street stops, it was covered. So we will circle back to that. And then the next question is around the Cotter Road and the proposed entrances from Cotter Road, and whether or not we know yet if it will be associated with traffic lights or slip lanes, or what that might look like, if it's still a bit early.
I might let others talk after me, but I think when we've talked with people out at some of the pop-ups, we've indicated that, and as Sam's talked to, some of the traffic studies will help us with what are the best resolution of the traffic that might use Cotter Road, and that will factor in some of those broader uses of Cotter Road and the capacity of Cotter Road. Lights at that intersection are an option, but it's not a definitive thing at the moment, but it's an option. So they're the sorts of things that will be examined in some of the traffic work.
I might just make a general comment as well. My previous role to the one I've got right now, I was actually development director for Molonglo for about 7 years. We absolutely know the conflict and the pain that's being experienced along Cotter Road at the moment. It's interesting that the current friction, I guess is a traffic term, is certainly not the end state for the Cotter Road. There's 2 significant infrastructure moves that will happen in Molonglo. One is the ribbon's almost cut on it, as we know. It's the bridge over the Molonglo River on John Gorton Drive. And there's a fair bit of energy and effort being thrown at the moment to the Parkway connector, I think Minister Steele has referred to it as, so that other connection out onto the Tuggeranong Parkway. So while I'm not saying that that's the silver bullet, the current state is certainly not the final state in terms of the future development of Molonglo, and we will see quite a bit of traffic pressure coming off once those big infrastructure projects are in place.
Thank you. I'll go to Fiona, and then I've probably got time for 2 more questions afterwards, but then people are welcome to come and have a chat. So I see a hand over there and a hand, up the back there. Noted. Excellent. So Fiona first, yeah, and then we'll do 2 more after that.
I've got plenty of questions. Would we consider this a missing middle development?
Team, would we consider it a missing middle development?
Well, I wouldn't suggest it is missing middle. Missing middle my understanding is more in the lower density areas, and it's more sort of 2-3 story townhouses and that type of development. So I wouldn't refer to this as a missing middle style of development.
Fair enough, thanks. Because it does have 40% of them can be 50 square metre apartments and 10% can be 40 square metre apartments. And when missing middle does come in, we'll be down to 35 square metre apartments. So half of them can be 50 square metres or less. In Woden, we see a lot of empty apartments of that size. They're not moving. So is there any chance that we can get some sort of bigger, more family orientated apartments?
I don't think what's in there precludes other options being put forward in terms of diversity of sizes of dwellings and 2-3 bedrooms. And that, I think I mentioned before, that's one of the things that we have heard from people, that if this is potentially an area that people might downsize to, you know, is there opportunity for more 3 bedrooms, or if there are intergenerational families, those sorts of things. So I don't think what's in these provisions precludes that sort of delivery.
If you're leaving it to the market, a lot of the ones in Woden are small and they are being bought by investors. It's only about 20% is my understanding of owner occupiers. So how are you going to ensure that you know, a whole heap of small apartments don't go up and they're just sold to investors, given their new dwellings? You know, they'll still get negative gearing, I guess, from interstate and international people just swooping in and taking up the small apartments.
I might let our colleagues at SLA talk more to that. I think that from the planning perspective, we're trying to put in place some provisions to enable diversity. I guess SLA is probably a lot more experienced in terms of delivery and responding to the market, or in fact leading the market. So I might let them talk to that.
Yeah, we have a few levers available to us in terms of specifying what gets built on the ground. There's lease purpose clauses. There's, you know, we can release sites under a design framework in addition to what might exist within the NCA. We don't have a lever that can, you know, stop people, whether they're investors or overseas investors, coming in and essentially, you know, buying up or you know, being customers within a development. So yeah, we are the delivery arm. We will ensure that we understand the needs in terms of housing mix, and I'd certainly take your comments about missing middle and diversity of product, and we absolutely know about the challenges in the apartment market at the moment. It can be a function of the cycle, but we'll see where things go from there. But certainly, you know, there are some levers in terms of built form, but there's no levers available to us in terms of who the buyers are.
I just have another question about the commercial areas. So they seem to be quite scattered across the development and they are facing onto Yarra Glen. So is there any, you know, will the plan provide like a hub, you know, like we have local shops, and will they integrate with the green areas? Like where's the beating heart when the commercial area is scattered so much? And because I have to get it all in one question, what is the purpose of having it on Yarra Glen when we hear language like humanising the corridor? What does that mean?
Okay, I'll just in terms of the beating heart, I guess, to use your terminology, those areas around the parks, the internal parks, are really meant to be areas where we think commercial would be useful for sort of local activity. And we know from other developments that is where people tend to gather around those areas where there's open space, and so commercial is often more viable in those locations. So we've tried to indicate where we think are viable spots for commercial, and definitely that has been driven by, you know, where are some hubs in some respects for the local community. But I might let Ian talk a little bit more about some of the proposed distribution as well and how that might play out.
Yeah, I think the intention, and graphically, if the DCDD, I mean the development conditions indicate retail fronting onto Yarra Glen, that's not the intention. It's really highlighting in red that we're where we want to achieve potential commercial ground floors, a lot of that will not be built initially. And so we're insisting on high floor-to-floor heights on the ground floor so that they're adaptable, so that they can evolve to include live work, small-scale commercial, retail. But the idea is to focus retail activity around the squares and to give orientation onto those public squares. But the extent of red that I think you're referring to is actually that extent of red is showing where adaptable ground floors are required, which require 4.6 metre or 4.5 metre ground floor heights, which mean they're adaptable.
Okay, Fiona, we will have members here afterwards for you to continue to ask. I will go to the front and then I will take the last question up the back. Okay, sorry, I missed it, but I will come to you afterwards. And then, as I said, we will be here for 10, 15 minutes after we finish for people to continue to talk to us.
So the NCA website FAQ handballs the availability of schools and population estimates for social infrastructure to the ACT government. The ACT government recently sold a large site on Carruthers Street, which was an old school, and I'm concerned that both the NCA and the ACT government are out of sync on school capacity planning. What sort of commitments can we make that both of you will work together to make sure that we have adequate social infrastructure for these new 1,200 dwellings instead of just handballing it between you and saying it's the other person's problem?
Sure. Yep. So we have been working closely with education and with our colleagues in City and Environment Directorate. The advice we've had is that North Curtin in and of itself can be accommodated within the priority enrolment areas for primary school, for
Sorry, Ian, can you just hold the mic a bit closer?
For primary and secondary schools. Colleges are, particularly Canberra College, is at capacity, so there is a need in the context for the whole of the Southern Gateway corridor to address that. But North Curtin in and of itself can be accommodated within
Curtin Primary School?
Yes.
Without deploying portables on the lawn like Garran Primary School and increasing classroom sizes?
Well, I can't answer that in detail because that's education.
I think I know the answer to it.
Yeah.
I'm very disappointed though.
Thank you. And up the back and then up the front. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. This is probably for the NCA. Martin Miller, former chair of the Woden Valley Community Council. I know a few people up the front there. We're talking about increasing density in our suburbs and density altogether. When are we going to stop the urban sprawl of the diplomatic estates? We've got Woden Lovett Tower. It's got 24 floors. It's 24 empty floors. Why aren't we looking to densify our diplomatic estates like they are around the world, particularly in the denser cities in Europe?
Sorry, I might, not sure I understood your question, so I'll attempt to answer, and if you need to redirect me, please do. But urban sprawl of our diplomatic estates, they are centralised at the moment and limited to a small number of suburbs in the central national area. I think if you're suggesting that the style of the estates are on large blocks and, usually single level, largish buildings, that's a unique and I think very attractive feature of our diplomatic estates being part of Canberra and part of the national capital. And in fact, we encourage in the diplomatic estates the countries to build in a style that reflects the architecture of their country and bring some of the story and features of their country into our national capital. So, as I said, I apologise if I've missed the point of your question. I'm
use existing buildings.
Yeah, well,
like they do overseas in London and other places where you'll have a few different diplomatic estates within existing buildings, and they're not showing their styles of their country in those existing buildings either.
The existing buildings. Sorry, I think in the Canberra buildings, yeah, many of them do. Some countries do choose to use existing buildings or to rent or to buy existing houses. But again, it's a feature, a decision of our government to support the diplomatic estate as quite a feature of Canberra and our national capital.
Lovely. Okay. And then our last question up the front. Like I said, if anyone would like to stay and have a chat afterwards, we're around. Also, if any of our community organisational members would like to take any of my wonderful love pictures back to their organisations, you're welcome to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the NCA for having this consultation. It is refreshing compared with a lot of the ACT government consultation. I can tell you there is a map out that has golden sun moth in this particular area. It's only a few months old. There's numerous sites, not only in the ACT zone, but also in the broader diplomatic area. So this is, as I say, a few months old. Some of the concerns that have been raised cover a lot of the issues. One of them is obviously densification, and having 92 dwellings per hectare is what I would call unparalleled in Canberra. It's more dense than Newtown in Singapore, and certainly the proposed density largely feels a need for a financial return to the ACT government. My concern about density is, again, from Yarralumla perspective and Curtin perspective, without a mint interchange, and it's great saying, we'll look at these incrementally, but governments are very bad in Australia looking at things in a disjointed, incremental way, and we never get things like the mint interchange. But when you come off a high-speed freeway like Adelaide Avenue, and a few hundred metres later you're stopped by traffic lights, and you're going to need traffic lights down from Nelson Tang's place on McCulloch Street as well, with the density that we're looking at. I don't know how all the buses are going to get through all that area too. But these are some of the realistic problems that we've got. You can't, and it's great for the ACT government people saying we'll look at this and we'll look at that. You can't look at one small part without looking at the other. And with great respect, Karen, for the North Curtin residential development, I don't think it meets the requirements of the National Capital Plan. There's certainly no strategic plan. There's no integration for light rail unless you want to walk about a kilometre. And there's very little, if any, urban infill guidelines or developments that can meet this particular standard.
Sorry, can I just confirm, is your question about the infill guidelines?
My question is the density, and the density is unparalleled in Canberra. It's unparalleled and I've provided infrastructure advice for 13 governments in Asia, 5 international agencies, and with great respect, there is very little commercial infrastructure to support a development like this. And I'm sorry, it just doesn't add up.
Thank you. Erin, are you going to?
Thank you for that. I think this evening's probably a good example of the different views that we get. This young man before just I don't want to misrepresent you, but I think indicated that it was good to have development and could we have gone further than what we've done. So that's the balancing act that we factor in the planning, and we're aware of some of the environmental issues. But this is a location where we could put density because of the potential for public transport, yes, which will require some changes to the system, and that's why we're all working together to do that. But it was decided that this is an appropriate site to put some density and some development, where people, there are a number of people also who just want development to happen that's high quality, good quality, well located, and we think that's what we've arrived at here. And yes, it will require us all working together to get that outcome, but we feel that we've done a pretty good job of balancing that in this. And I appreciate that we've got all different views here tonight, but I think our document, we consider it's a pretty good representation of what could happen there. I think I have referred to that we think the density we've proposed is appropriate for the location and a range of other considerations. So we obviously have a difference of opinion, which is something that comes out in these. I don't think we're going to agree on that. So I think we've all.
I might just say, why don't we have a chat again afterwards? I know we spoke at the shops the other week as well. I am going to wrap up the formal proceedings of the night. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along and having conversations with me over the last couple of weeks and also tonight. It doesn't end here, though. We still have another 4 weeks before the 10th of June and our consultation period closes. So the communication inbox is always open. You can also give me a call. I'm happy to receive emails and continue to talk through questions as we work over the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much to our online audience. I'm going to look directly at the camera. I know there was several of you online. It was lovely to have you, and everyone have a wonderful night and get home safe. Thank you so much.